The NBC Action News investigation you're about to see is already getting results. Tonight, election officials in Kansas and Missouri are taking action to prevent dead people from casting votes.
Well, to break the story, NBC Action News investigator Russ Potasic sorted through thousands of suspected dead registered voters.
Elizabeth and Mark, until our investigation, although long buried, on paper they were alive and qualified to go to the polls. And in a few cases, records showed the dead actually voting. Out of the thousands of names represented by cold computer databases of the dead, we focused on one Emily McDaniels of Lee Summit. She died 2 years ago and is remembered by the pet name her dad called her.
I've always called her Emmy, and I'm the only one she would let call her Emmy.
She loved dancing. Loved to go to the dancing shoe.
Could the young woman listed on paper as living and qualified to vote for this year's election? This is Emily's voting record. Be the same Emily McDaniels who went by Emmy and loved dancing?
Address, date of birth, that's all correct.
The same records that still showed Emily as a qualified voter for this coming November 2nd election recorded her as actually voting in the presidential elections 2 years ago. But that's impossible because she was cremated 2 months before the election.
November 4th was when she voted. She had died September 13th.
It's tough.
Emily's father says he'd notified elections officials of Emily's lupus and fibromyalgia-related death 2 years ago.
She was quite ill for a long time.
Deceased is even handwritten across her name on 2008 voter logs obtained by NBC Action News.
So it's just a clerical error on our part.
But you were officially notified 2 years ago on these records.
Correct.
But 2 years later, you still have her listed as an active voter, and officially, she's listed as casting a vote.
Right. But she hasn't really casted a vote.
Officials say the voter appeal tab next to Emily's name wasn't torn, indicating although Emily was recorded as voting, no one actually cast an official ballot.
So that's our fault that we missed that.
Here's the death information over here.
Missouri Watchdog analyst and reporter Earl Glenn tipped us to Emily's case and to over 1,900 registered voters in Kansas and more than 4,200 registered voters in Missouri that his review identified as having names and birth dates that match the Social Security death list.
Given these lists of inactive voters, I could vote all day long.
Although our investigation confirmed cases where dead registered voters were credited with voting, we haven't identified actual ballots being cast.
We feel very confident that a dead person did not vote.
The potential is really big. I think there's a great potential that an election could be thrown fairly easily.
Our investigation identified cases in Johnson and Jackson counties where the dead were not only qualified to vote, records counted them as voting.
People they just do their job just to get by.
It's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Officials say, at least for Emily, it won't happen again.
Now, these are the ones that we know of, like Miss Emily. She will be off there.
So you've taken one off.
We're going to take one. We will. Well, we will.
We've released thousands of suspected dead registered voter names to Missouri and Kansas officials, and like in our review, officials are finding most of the names are false matches, but they confirmed identifying more and more dead registered voters every day over the past week as our investigation escalated. Now, all this playing heavily in Kansas politics as the Republican challenger to the incumbent in the Secretary of State's office is accusing the Democrat of mishandling these records. Meantime, the Democrats launching back. The Republican had a news conference today where he specified a specific dead voter, and it turns out, according to the Democrats, their records show that dead voter is alive and well. So this will play into politics, and officials say these were clerical errors when they were shown actually voting.
So the basic belief is these are clerical errors, but someone potentially could use them to vote fraudulently.
And the problem is that, we don't know how many registered voters continue to be registered and qualified despite being dead.
All right. Very interesting. Thanks, Russ.
You bet.